Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
And good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. As always, we hope you're keeping up to date with your latest weather information, whether that's through the NOAA Weather Radio, Marine VHF, or by going to our website at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. That takes you to the same place, of course. You can find us in between Alaska weather shows on Facebook. NWS Alaska is the place to go there. On Twitter, NWS Alaska, or just search for the hashtag AKwx, and that'll connect you with more of the conversation happening about weather around our entire state. And then online, YouTube, you can search for AKwx TV. That gets you to this program online. After the show, you'll get the complete 30-minute forecast online from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org. You can also find it on their webpage, or go to NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks to get the daily afternoon map briefings there. Here's a look at what's going on across our state tonight. Freezing rain advisories have been dropped from northern parts of southeast. Those expired around 4 o'clock this afternoon, so weather conditions are improving there. But a look up north indicates that wind advisories are in effect for the Yukon Flats, mainly the higher terrain and the passes, all the way through Bettles and the central interior and up across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. We're expecting gusts there over 35 miles per hour and in some cases as high as 50 miles per hour. A little bit of a stronger wind going across some of the northern terrain and also across the flats just on the north side, and because of that it's catching a lot of the snow and blowing that around. So winter weather advisories continue, and they will through a good chunk of your Tuesday as well. So poor visibility on top of some stronger winds expected in those areas. The winds really pick up once you get out to the Chukchi Seacoast, and in those areas around Kotzebue Sound, the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula, the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, and all the way out toward St. Lawrence Island, high wind warnings are in effect, and that'll continue tonight and into early tomorrow as well. Those northeasterlies really going strong, and they may gust as high as 60 miles per hour. So watch for those winds to stay strong through the rest of tonight and in through at least the first part of tomorrow. So that's the hazardous weather picture is mainly for the interior and certainly for the Bering Strait communities and the Kotzebue Sound region. As we look at the weather picture, you can see those strong northeasterly winds shaping the cloud picture there across St. Lawrence Island and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Those northeasterlies are keeping things fairly dry across west and southwestern Alaska and creating a pretty broad cloud shield across most of the Bering Strait. If you look even further south and west, we see what is a typhoon there across eastern Asia. That moisture streaming out and away from it, so we're not actually seeing the typhoon move across the central Pacific at this point, just the moisture leaving the top of that, and all that is being channeled into the jet stream and heading toward the North Pacific and parts of the Gulf of Alaska, so something to keep a watch on in the coming days. Low pressure in its entirety is seen here across most of the Gulf of Alaska. You can see that whole system spiraling backwards into south and western Alaska and Bristol Bay. And it looks like it's going to hover there for the next several days. As it sits and spins, we'll keep pretty much most of the weather in status quo form. That means what you see right now is pretty much what you're going to get for the next couple days. Unsettled across south central and southwest, and another rainmaker is moving through southeastern Alaska. The frontal boundary working its way in further and further into the interior, and as it does so, it will keep that stronger southerly flow working right up through the Dixon entrance. So expect some stronger winds there, especially tonight and into tomorrow, as well as added rain coming through the central and southern parts of southeast, and warmer weather lifting northward as we get into the mid part of the week. Across the north, not a great chance for any precipitation anytime soon, but it looks like the winds will stay with you, and at least through midweek we'll keep that stronger east and northeasterly flow cutting off through Kotzebue Sound and the Bering Strait communities. Here's a look at the surface chart, and at 960 millibars there, it was a potent system south of Kodiak Island earlier this weekend. It brought some pretty decent gusts through the region as well as rainfall, and that's going to continue tonight, but at least the winds seem to be subsiding ever so slightly. The frontal boundary is working through the eastern part of the Gulf and northward toward the Kenai Peninsula, and that's keeping a rain mix with snow across south central. It looks like a fairly warm situation for mid-December. You can also see these black lines. These are troughs of low pressure, so they indicate a little bit of a faster moving area of wind in most areas, especially on the lee side of mountain ranges. And you can see the constricted flow we have indicated by the black lines. These are lines of constant pressure, or isobars as we call them in the Weather Center. And as that happens, that usually means faster moving wind through that area. And for the North Slope and for the Brooks Range and the Kotzebue Sound region and the Bering Strait communities, that's exactly what's going on tonight. So anytime you see these lines kind of pressed together in really tight form, you can probably guess that there's going to be some wind with that, and that's what we're seeing tonight. As we go into the evening and overnight hours, that situation doesn't change very much there for the Brooks Range, the Kotzebue Sound region, or the Bering Strait communities. So once again, wind advisories for most of the northern areas south of the Brooks Range and north of the Yukon, and also across the coastal plain where winter weather advisories continue, and high wind warnings again for the Chukchi Seacoast and the Bering Strait down to St. Lawrence Island. Low pressure south of Haida Gwaii at 967 millibars is working the frontal boundary northward once again. We'll have snow showers for the Copper River Basin and some areas generally west of the Parks Highway toward the western Alaska Range, and rains possible for many coastal communities as well as Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and pockets in the Bering Strait, the Bering Seacoast. As we look into Tuesday afternoon, a better chance for snow across the interior of Yukon and right around Eagle to Northway and southward. Anything closer to Fairbanks looks like mainly flurries at this point, so more clouds than anything else. Snow probably not falling across the North Slope or the Brooks Range, but a better chance that it will be blowing around. And low pressure backs up just a little bit more to the west at 966 millibars. It's filling in ever so slightly, but it's still a force to contend with. Across the north and eastern Gulf, the frontal boundary is slowly falling apart, but it is still there and still keeping the winds across the southern parts of southeast. Rain may fall as far north as Haines and Skagway, mixing in a little bit with snow at elevation, but most areas to the south will be dealing with all liquid sunshine there. Rain and snow showers for parts of south central, including the Anchorage Bowl and the Matanuska Valley. And further out west, areas around Shemya may be flirting with snow a little bit more predominantly than any areas out toward the east. Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and Adak all expected to see rain and probably drizzle throughout the day. For Wednesday, low pressure continues to wrap up on itself across the eastern Gulf. That's down to 962 millibars, so this isn't going away. You'll stay in a predominantly south and southeasterly flow through the Dixon entrance. Petersburg, Heidelberg, Ketchikan, and Annette, all the way up towards Sitka, look to be some of the warmer places, but just on the northern side, there's a potential some of that could mix in with a little bit of snow. Doesn't look like any major accumulations there at this point, but something to watch. And across Yakutat through the Prince William Sound region, Kenai Peninsula, and the Cook Inlet area, we're looking for some rain and snow showers to continue through Wednesday. Northward, a few pockets of snow showers for the interior, the middle Yukon Valley up toward Denali, and maybe close to Fairbanks, but most of that will be higher up in the mountains. Most areas for the interior, up and down the Yaukan and westward, will be dealing with dry, but probably breezy, if not pretty windy weather, especially on the North Slope through Wednesday. Here's a look at your temperatures this afternoon. Southeast was sitting in pretty good shape there, barring the rainfall that you saw, some cases up to an inch or more around Annette. 40s and 50s for most areas there. Sitka was 50 degrees, Ketchikan and Annette in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees. Hyder a little bit cooler at 36. Juneau and areas northward toward Haines and Skagway were in the 30s and 40s. Prince William Sound saw daytime highs in the 30s and 40s today. Homer was a mild 50 degrees. Kodiak Island in the low to mid 40s. 36 around Anchorage, 38 around Talkeetna. Healy was a much colder 9. Fairbanks only 5 degrees. Eagle showed 8 degrees by late afternoon. Fort Greely was 23. Northward around Fort Yukon, only 3 degrees, 2 in Anaktuvuk Pass. And the Arctic coast saw a lot of cold weather today. Temperatures anywhere from 15 to 22 below around Prudhoe Bay, and Deadhorse Kaktovik was 10 below. The Kotzebue Sound region in the single digits and teens. Shishmaref 18, 25 in Nome. Norton Sound readings were in the teens and 20s there. Unalakleet was about 20 degrees. McGrath had 8, Galena 18. Further down toward Bristol Bay, most areas were above freezing, from Dillingham at 34 to King Salmon at 46. The Alaska Peninsula pretty much in the lower to mid 40s today. Dutch Harbor, Unalaska around 43. The Pribilovs right around 40 degrees. And colder than that for the central and western chain, Shemya only 35. Overnight low temperatures will drop into the teens and 20s for most on the west coast and Norton Sound. Nome down to 10. The Arctic coast sees no relief, 15 to 30 below in some cases, 2 below around Fort Yukon, 1 above around Fairbanks and the Tanana Valley. South Central is expected to stay in the 20s and 30s tonight, 38 in Kodiak, with Southeast expecting lows in the 30s to about 40 degrees or so. High temperatures there tomorrow will cool a little bit for most areas, back in the mid to upper 40s. Some of the warmest weather right around the coast from, let's say, Ketchikan to Heidelberg to Sitka, around 48 degrees. South Central in the 30s and 40s, with Kodiak City around 44. Southwest in the 30s and 40s, as well as the Aleutian Chain, 37 in St. Paul. The west coast in the teens to 20s north of Bethel. For Unalakleet and places like Nome, expect highs only in the mid-teens to low 20s. Kotzebue Sound, Kivalina might make it to 12 tomorrow. The Arctic coast sees a little bit of a break, but temperatures are still sub-zero from about 5 below to 15 below in most areas. And the interior, including Fairbanks, should be looking at single digits to about 10 above. Here's a look at your flying weather now. We will see relatively clear weather for most of the passes north of the Alaska range, but remember there's going to be blowing snow across the north slope, so expect that to be hit and miss MVFR to IFR. It's kind of hard to draw that situation in. Out across the west, expect MVFR conditions for most of the Bering Sea. The coastal areas along the southwest should be okay, except for areas a little bit north of Dillingham and north and east of King Salmon, and along the south coast, along the Alaska Peninsula, and some spots along the Kodiak Island region. Most of southeast also looking at MVFR throughout the day. Here's your pass conditions up north, though. Once you go north of Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, I would expect considerably worse conditions there, but flying through the passes themselves should be okay for visibility. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expect IFR conditions throughout a good part of the day. Rainy Pass may worsen a little bit throughout your afternoon on Tuesday. Windy Pass, expect MVFR conditions throughout your Tuesday, as well as Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see MVFR conditions there. Tanita Pass starts out at IFR, and we expect some improvement throughout the afternoon toward marginal conditions. Porter's Pass, the pass itself probably won't be horribly bad, but do expect much worse visibility on the eastern side there. On the western side, probably VFR to MVFR throughout the day. Chilkoot and White Pass, IFR conditions in the morning with some improvement throughout the afternoon. As you saw on the chart, MVFR conditions are expected by afternoon. You can see some warmer airs here north of the Dixon entrance, and it cools off considerably as you get north toward Juneau. The surface freezing line really not that far away, but we do have some warmer air that's overrunning south and western Alaska and parts of south central Alaska. And as we always talk about, that's a really good setup when we have moisture in the atmosphere for freezing rain. And we've been seeing that on and off throughout southwest and south central and the Alaska Peninsula for several days now. So this situation remains the same. If you run into some precipitation, chances are it's going to at least be a mix in that area. With the moisture in place, you do have to climb up a little bit higher to get into some decent icing potential, though. Some of that across the Copper River Basin and along the Alcan border starts around about 5,000 feet or higher there. So that's at least light to isolated moderate. Southeast, a little bit east of the inner waterways there, generally also above 5,000 feet for southwest. Areas south of Sand Point all the way out toward Cold Bay and False Pass. Slightly better chance for some occasional moderate on the south side of the chain. And then a little bit further west from Adak and north of Kiska, generally above 3,000 feet with some light to isolated moderate around the Bering Strait community, probably north of St. Lawrence Island for tomorrow. The jet stream shows low pressure is just sitting out on its own lonesome self out there south and west of Bristol Bay. The main flow, or the fast-moving river of air, is just south of that, so it's really got nothing to latch onto and move it along. High pressure sitting across western Canada and the western sections of the lower 48. As it's doing that, we also have stronger high pressure up across the Chukchi Sea, and that's driving in more of a stronger northeasterly flow, and that's combining with that pressure gradient at the surface that give us pretty fast moving winds from the north and east across the Chukchi Sea coast, so that's probably not going to change very quickly. Until low pressure gets caught up in the jet stream again, we're going to stay in this general pattern at least through the rest of the week. At 9,000 feet, you can see the circulation clearly here over Bristol Bay. Easterly winds moving offshore, stronger winds coming in around the Bering Strait communities and then diving southward. Wind speeds there around 20 to about 30 knots or so. Some of the stronger winds around the Bering Strait, of course. A light easterly flow across the interior at this level and a southerly flow working up toward the Dixon entrance about 40 to 50 knots with a weak circulation just south and east of Yakutat. At 3,000 feet, pretty much an identical situation here. We've got stronger winds up across the Chukchi Seacoast, much stronger flow across the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, 45 to as high as 65 knots at 3,000 feet. Northerlies coming across the Bering Strait and across the Bering Sea, about 30 to 50 knots. Low pressures sitting a little bit closer to False Pass and Cold Bay. Southerlies coming into Kodiak Island, 15 to 25, and the winds diminish greatly as they cross over the Alaska Range, especially around the Wrangell-St. Elias region, but pick up again, moving over the Dixon Entrance and Haida Gwaii. So turbulence, we really should focus on some of the west and northwestern parts of our state, anywhere below 10,000 feet, and anywhere north of the Brooks Range is where you're probably going to find a greater threat for occasional moderate tomorrow. Many areas along north and south of the Brooks Range here through Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound should at least see light to isolated moderate throughout the day. And then south of the Dixon Entrance, below 6,000 feet, you'll have a much better chance to run into some chop there, also across the western chain. So if you're in northwest Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, or the Seward Peninsula tomorrow, or anywhere in the middle Yukon Valley or westward toward the Noatak or Kobuk Valleys, probably looking at kind of a bumpy day to fly tomorrow if you can see. Let's look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather. Stay tuned. Giddy up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening, our guest is Dr. Bill Rhodes. Dr. Rhodes received his master's degree from Georgetown and his PhD from the University of Colorado. He had a distinguished career in the United States Air Force, which culminated with his being the head of the philosophy department at the Air Force Academy. He's a member of the editorial board of the Aviators Model Code of Conduct. Bill learned to fly in high school, and he owns a Cessna Turbo 210. What I'm really proud of is the fact that Dr. Rhodes traveled up to Anchorage last week and was the featured speaker at our fall safety seminar on Saturday. Thanks to the support of Alaska Airlines, the Copper Whale Inn and Inlet Towers, we were able to bring Bill here. Bill, I can't thank you enough for coming to Alaska and sharing your thoughts with our audience. It's a real pleasure to welcome you.
Delighted to be here.
Let's start with the term professional pilot ethics. What does that encompass?
Well, we think it encompasses those aspects of a pilot's dispositions, their character, if you will, that aren't typically checked on check rides or addressed by instructors in any formal way. So if there's someone that you know whom you trust a great deal in an airplane, they probably have characteristics that you're perceiving that cause you to trust them. You trust them quite literally with your life. And if you know someone that worries you in an aircraft or somebody that you're afraid to fly with, you're probably making another kind of assessment about character, assuming that those two pilots are both qualified, competent pilots. So we're interested in professionalism and analyzing the gap between the trustworthy pilot and the pilot that's a little bit frightening.
Now, Bill, I know you recently completed what I found a fascinating study on pilot decision making, and I think it stems from what you just said about people you trust and people you don't trust. As you know, our audience are pilots, mechanics, dispatchers, and people interested in aviation. Is there anything from that study that would resonate with those folks?
Well, there might be, because the study started, in fact, with asking folks like that, folks who are around aviation and have some experience and have the capacity to make these judgments about their peers and colleagues. And so when we originally started this work in 2007, we found that if we asked dispatchers, line people, CFIs, DPEs, accident claims investigators, if there were characteristics that they found frightening in a pilot, we asked them to name them. And we came up with a great deal of what we call convergent data. That is, different sources told us the same sorts of things. For example, one scary trait that was identified is folks who won't listen to advice, or folks who race through ratings or race to advance to a more complex aircraft quickly. Those were characteristics that folks in aviation found a little bit scary. On the contrary, folks who took their time, who would take advice, who would study, came out as being more trustworthy in the judgment of these aviation observers.
And your study was done with simulators, is that correct?
That's correct. Once we saw that convergent data from different sources, we began to ask, is there a way we can do this formally? And we did go out and do formal survey work. We got over 400 responses from experienced aircrew to questions like, if you've observed a behavior in a cockpit that positively impressed you, what was that behavior? And if you observed one that scared you, what was that behavior? And after getting about 400 responses like this, we were able to reduce them using a bunch of math and statistics down to some observable behaviors that you could work opportunities to display into a simulator scenario. So you offer a scenario, for example, that gives somebody the chance to listen to advice from a passenger. And you'll see that there are some pretty radical differences in how pilots and simulators manage their fellow aviators or passengers in an airplane. Some are, if you will, a little more trustworthy than others in terms of how they handle advice.
So the study are we going to end up with some guidelines on how to identify these people? Are these people going to learn how to identify these traits in them or characteristics in themselves?
Yeah, it's a little bit too early to say we could do that for sure, but we did find a very tight correlation between the display of certain behaviors and a bad simulator outcome, that is, a crash in the simulator. And we saw some very tight relationships between the display of these positive behaviors and a positive simulator outcome. Now, how did we establish that? Well, over 108 pilots, quite a few flew through all of our challenging scenarios very well. When I see that, I have an idea of what constitutes a professional or an expert pilot. And I have a baseline to compare myself or any other pilot to when we fly the next scenario.
Now, we've run out of time, but I want to get you back on at least once, if not twice more, because I've got a lot of questions, and I really, really value where you're going with this study. So we'll get you back on next time.
Happy to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. Tune in on Friday. Dr. Bill Rhodes will be back with us and continuing his discussion of this fascinating study. Until then, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. We'll see you again on Friday. Temperatures across the Bering Strait, especially north of the Bering Strait, where we see a lot of open water still at this point across the Chukchi Sea. So cold that as soon as the winds stop, our sea ice program experts say that the ice will come in very quickly. Already plenty of grease ice there, but the winds are still a little bit high for that to fill in. So probably sometime in the next week or so, we'll probably see this close off around the Bering Strait and point south. Well, the ice is certainly increasing along the western coastline as well. Anytime you want to check this out or the outlook for your community, you can do that by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at winds for southeast now. As we head through Tuesday, a general flow from the south and east coming up to 40 miles per hour through some of the central and southern inner waterways there. The higher gusts are expected as well, and we have an opposing flow coming out of the Lynn Canal around 25 knots with 5-foot seas there. Otherwise, offshores from Yakutat all the way through the northern entrances, more of an east to west flow there up to 20 knots and 14-foot seas, with southerlies coming up from the Dixon entrance northward towards Sitka around 35 knots with 17 to 18-foot seas. The winds stay up around the southern half of southeast tomorrow, 35 to 40 knots there. Certainly some higher gusts in the region. The northerlies come down through the Stevens Passage region, 25 to 30 knots northward with 4 to 5-foot seas on the inside. And east and northeasterly winds continue from Gustavus northward toward Yakutat with seas running around 14 feet as we go into the midweek. For south central, light northeasterly winds through Prince William Sound and small seas as well through the Cook Inlet. Expect 4 to 5-foot seas there with 15-knot winds north and northeast. Easterly flow west of the Barren Islands. Otherwise, it's a southeasterly flow coming into Resurrection Bay and the eastern side of the Kenai Pen, anywhere from 15 to 25 with 10 to 12-foot seas there across the western Gulf. Inside of Shelikof Strait, 4-foot seas for Tuesday. Those drop a little bit more to 3 feet as we get into Wednesday. North and northeasterly winds continue down Cook Inlet, and more of a light and variable flow on the north and western side of the Gulf. Around 10 knots there with an 8-foot sea. Northeasterlies continue to be light inside of Prince William Sound, and southeasterlies coming into Kodiak Island. Around the Alaska Peninsula, this kind of pattern says nothing to me except low pressure, and it's sitting right about here. Northeasterly winds on the north side of that, inside of Bristol Bay at 25 knots. Westerlies around King Cove and Sand Point at 15 knots with an 8-foot sea, and southerlies from Castle Cape down to Chignik. 25 knots with an 11-foot sea there. The pattern continues for Wednesday. The winds become a little more light and variable south and west of Kodiak Island down to 10 knots, 25 knots south of Sand Point and King Cove up to 10-foot seas there and 6-foot seas on the north side. For the Aleutians, north and westerly winds for the central and eastern chain, more of a northwesterly flow from Kiska to Attu at 35 knots with a 15-foot sea. And you can see a general pattern continues there for Wednesday, as Ruben would say, no change. So there you go. That's Wednesday. Across the west, a north and easterly flow coming out of Norton Sound, 30 to 35 knots. Freezing spray along the ice edge there, especially in the north. 25 to 30 knots on either side of Macoriuk, and northerlies for St. Paul and St. George. 10-foot seas on Tuesday. That becomes a little more northwesterly as we get into Wednesday with an 8-foot sea. Northeasterlies around St. Lawrence Island stay strong. Northerlies around the Kuskokwim Bay with 4-foot seas expected through the midweek. And across the north, easterlies up to 20 knots from Prudhoe Bay out toward Kaktovik. Northeasterlies from Barrow all the way down to Point Lay. And then we have very strong winds. Storm force there from Cape Lisburn down through the Kotzebue Sound region, 50 to 55 knots. And still some open water, 13-foot seas there. Those diminish to Wednesday at 40 to 45. 10-foot seas are outside of Kotzebue Sound with winds from the northeast at 40 knots, 10 to 15 knots for the Beaufort Seacoast toward Barrow. Recapping tonight's weather, obviously some strong winds around the Chukchi Seacoast and the Bering Strait communities. Look for high wind warnings for the northern sections of the Seward Peninsula, the western tip all the way down towards St. Lawrence Island. Those winds may gust as high as 60 miles per hour. Wind advisories north or actually south of the Brooks Range. That will continue through tonight and tomorrow. And on the north side, winter weather advisories for blowing snow, so poor visibility could be a problem there. Look for some snow showers and light accumulations along the Alcan. The best chance for persistent and wet weather will be along the Gulf Coast communities through Wednesday as low pressure sits just offshore of southeast. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.